March 16, 1984, a dramatic incident unfolded at Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport involving Jeff Doucette, who was set to face trial for the kidnap and SA of 11-year-old Jody Plauché. As police were escorting Doucette through the airport, Jody's father, Gary Plauché, emerged from his hiding place near a line of payphones and fatally shot Doucette in the head at close range. A year before the shooting took place, the Plauché family had enrolled their 3 children, including Jody, in Jeff Doucette's karate class. Jody showed exceptional progress and was even selected to be part of Doucette's competitive team for tournaments. When Gary Plauché discovered that Doucette, an ex-Marine, was living in his martial arts studio without any nearby family, he felt compassion for him. Gary extended an invitation for Doucette to come to his home, offering him a shower, fresh clothes, and a Sunday dinner. The Plauché family developed a strong bond with Jeff Doucette, to the point where he was allowed to visit their home and spend time with their children, taking them on training exercises and engaging in fun activities. During this time, Gary and June Plauché were going through a divorce due to Gary's struggles with alcoholism, which had strained their marriage. Gary's limited access to his children, seeing them only every other weekend, was a source of pain for him. However, he found solace in knowing that his kids had a respectable role model like Jeff Doucette. And even Gary himself became a devoted supporter of Doucette and utilized his connections with BWEC TV station to provide airtime for showcasing Doucette's martial arts class. But unknown to Gary and his wife June, Jeff Doucette had been subjecting their son to SA. The abuse started when Jody was just 10 years old. During a car ride, Doucette offered to teach Jody how to drive. Jody would sit in his lap and handle the steering, while Doucette controlled the gear shift. This inappropriate behavior made Jody uncomfortable, but he didn't realize the full extent of the situation at the time. During the trip to the karate event in Houston, Texas, Doucette's inappropriate behavior towards Jody became more serious. He explicitly told Jody that he planned on doing something to him that same night. Doucette crawled under Jody's blankets later that same night after the rest of the kids from the martial arts school had fallen asleep. What he did next would make Jody realize he was in serious danger. These actions from Jeff Doucette went on for about a month until he told Jody, "Okay, now I'm going to you." Occasionally, Doucette would even call a halt to practice and send the rest of the kids to 7-Eleven for snacks. "Not you, Jody. I need to do some extra work with you," he would say. Then he would take the young boy back to his room. Doucette continued his inappropriate actions with Jody, sometimes repeating them twice a day. Despite knowing deep down that what his teacher was doing was wrong, Jody felt conflicted and unsure about how to confide in someone. He admired Doucette and saw him as a fun and friendly person to be around. Authorities noted that Doucette frequently spent time with his students, taking them to various outings such as the skating rink or other activities. Several parents had already become suspicious of Doucette's behavior and decided to remove their children from his classes due to his strange actions around young boys. Jody's uncle also grew concerned about the martial arts instructor after witnessing his unusual behavior around his nephew. When Jody won first place at a karate tournament in Dallas, Texas, the Plauché family made arrangements for him to stay with his uncle instead of sharing a hotel room with Doucette. Jody's uncle observed that Doucette appeared upset and did not engage in conversation when he dropped off Jody. The uncle became even more concerned when Doucette kissed Jody on the lips before saying goodbye. He shared his concerns with Gary, Jody's father, emphasizing that something was concerning in Doucette's relationship with Jody. However, Gary chose to stand by Doucette, despite his brothers insisting that he was mistaken. After Gary moved out, Doucette started visiting the Plauché residence more frequently. On Sunday, February 19, 1984, Doucette came over and told Jody that he wanted to show him some carpet he was laying. Miss Plauché was informed that it would only take about an hour. However, as several hours passed without their return, June became worried and called her friend, who happened to be a deputy sheriff. June called Gary but couldn't reach him. She drove 4 hours to a relative of Doucette to find Jody, but they had already left. Gary was out of state for a wedding when he received June's message. He rushed home upon hearing about Jody's disappearance, and 10 days later, Doucette called June, demanding the boys' school transcripts for a reunion in New York. June rejected his plan and begged him to bring Jody back so that they could sort it out. Doucette then threatened June, saying, "Listen to me, if you ever want to see Jody again, you'll meet us here." In an attempt to deceive Doucette, June told him that if Jody didn't return, Gary might gain custody of all the children. She claimed that she would then retrieve them from Gary. After the line went dead, June anxiously waited for nearly an hour without any communication from the police. Eventually, they called to provide the much-awaited confirmation that Jody was safe and that Doucette had been arrested. During the plane ride back to Louisiana, Doucette confessed to his crimes after being indicted by a grand jury on a charge of aggravated kidnapping. When questioned about his motive for kidnapping Jody, Doucette claimed that he did so because he was facing an arrest warrant for financial crimes, including writing bad checks and fraud. He expressed his fear of not being able to see Jody or the Plauchés again. As part of his attempt to conceal their identities, Doucette dyed Jody's hair black to make it easier to pass him off as his own son. In addition, Doucette made a false claim that June had planned to run away with him and the children. But June strongly denied these allegations, and Jody underwent a medical examination, and during subsequent questioning, he disclosed that he had willingly accompanied Jeffrey Doucette to California on March 1st. Jody was then flown back to Louisiana to be reunited with his family. The authorities were relieved that their son had returned unharmed, and it appeared that everything was back to normal for the Plauché family. Gary and June were devastated by the revelation, and struggled to come to terms with the fact that their son had been violated by someone they had trusted and treated as part of their family. In an effort to understand the situation better, June chose to remain calm and approached Jody to have an honest conversation. She asked him directly if the allegations were true, giving him a safe space to share his experiences and feelings. Jody's confession to his mother brought a sense of relief as he unburdened himself from the weight of his dark secret. June's calm demeanor and support provided a safe space for him to open up about his experiences. Meanwhile, Gary Plauché, however, Jody's father, was deeply affected by the betrayal of trust and the realization of what had happened to his son. He found himself sinking into a dark place, overwhelmed by the disturbing thoughts and emotions associated with the heinous acts committed by the man he had once trusted. Gary, consumed by the shame and embarrassment, turned to alcohol as a means of coping with his overwhelming emotions. On March 16, 1984, while drinking at a local bar, Gary overheard a conversation involving Jeff Doucette, the bartender, and someone from the WBEC TV station discussing his arrival time. This sparked a sense of urgency in Gary, fueled by a mix of emotions and fueled by the information he had heard. He made his way to the airport, drinking black coffee to stay alert. He closely monitored the flight times with a hidden .38 revolver in his boot. Gary disguised himself with a baseball cap and dark sunglasses, positioning himself near the payphones awaiting the arrival of Doucette. Overwhelmed by his emotions, he reached out to a friend and confessed his intentions. As the police approached with Doucette, Gary uttered the words to his friend, "Here he comes, you're about to hear a gunshot." Gary's friend desperately tried to hang up and alert the police, but unfortunately, time was not on their side. In a moment of intense emotion, Gary turned away from the payphones and fired his gun at Doucette from an incredibly close distance of less than 3 feet. The police swiftly moved in and apprehended Gary. Despite the chaos and commotion, Gary remained surprisingly calm as he hung up the payphone he had been using. The weight of the situation began to sink in as Mike Barnett, a sheriff's deputy and a friend of the Plauché family, shouted in disbelief. Barnett had not recognized Gary until after the shooting. "If somebody did it to your kid, you do it too," said Plauché as he was hauled off to jail. Jeffrey Doucette died the next day and Gary Plauché was charged with second-degree murder. A day later, Plauché was out on a $100,000 bond posted by a friend. His lawyer, Foster Sanders, then committed him to a psychiatric ward. The psychiatrist who examined Gary concluded that he was unable to distinguish right from wrong at the time of the shooting. Gary believed he was hearing the voice of God, instructing him to kill Doucette in order to protect his son and other children. Defense lawyer Foster Sanders argued that the shooting was a justifiable homicide, pointing to a psychiatrist's report that described Gary's profound depression resulting from his belief that Jody had been victimized. Gary was never sentenced to prison, and this is one of those cases where you kind of root for the killer, as strange as it might sound. But although I don't really want to be too partial, it's not unimaginable that a lot of us watching would do something similar if our children were subjected to such abuse. Now Jody, the victim of Jeff's abuse, is actually grown up and is seemingly doing pretty well for himself. And I actually thought about reaching out to him for an interview for this video, but I just didn't really know where to look or if my channel is even big enough. Gary Plauché stated that he never regretted the murder and would do it again if given the opportunity. And to conclude, I read all the comments, so feel free to leave your insights on this case in the comment section. What would you have done if you were in Gary's situation? But nonetheless, thank you for watching this episode of Horror Vault.